She didn't walk in with bodyguards. She didn't have a personal assistant trailing behind her, carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with contracts. There was no first-class upgrade waiting at the gate, no VIP lounge reservation under her name, no one rushing ahead to clear a path. Vivian Cole walked through Terminal C of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport the same way she'd walked through 100 airports before this one, quietly, deliberately, without drawing a single eye. She wore a navy blazer over a simple white blouse. Dark slacks. Comfortable shoes. A single carry-on bag she pulled herself. No jewelry except a thin gold watch, the same one her mother had given her on the day she signed her first business deal, back when a six-figure contract felt like the entire world. That morning, she had declined a private jet. Her assistant, Marcus, had practically begged her. "Vivian, you don't have to do this. The Gulfstream is ready. It takes 40 minutes door to door." She had looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup and said, simply, "I want to see it for myself." He hadn't pushed further. He knew that look. When Vivian Cole wanted to see something for herself, there was no force on earth that could redirect her. So she had booked an economy seat on Horizon Airways Flight 112, Atlanta to New York, departing at 9:15 a.m. And nobody at that gate, not the agents, not the flight attendants, not the supervisor who watched her approach the boarding line with barely concealed disdain, had any idea that the woman they were about to humiliate owned the pen that would sign the final acquisition papers before the day was over. They had no idea that Vivian Cole was about to become their boss. They were about to make the worst mistake of their careers. To understand why what happened on that plane mattered so deeply, you have to understand where Vivian Cole came from. She was born in a small apartment in West Atlanta, the middle child of three. Her mother, Gloria, cleaned offices downtown. Her father, Raymond, drove a delivery truck for a grocery distributor. They were not poor in spirit, not even close, but they knew exactly how much every dollar cost, and they made sure their children knew it too. Vivian was the quiet one. Her older brother Darius was the loud one, the charismatic one, the one who filled every room he entered. Her younger sister Priya, named after a nurse who had been kind to their mother during a difficult pregnancy, was the charming one, the one who could get a smile out of anyone. Vivian was the one who watched. She sat in the back of classrooms and absorbed everything. She read books that weren't on the syllabus. She stayed after school not because she needed help, but because the school library had a section of business biographies that she devoured one by one. By the time she was 14, she had read about Madam C.J. Walker, about Oprah Winfrey, about Robert Johnson and Reginald Lewis. She had underlined passages with a mechanical pencil and folded corners on pages she wanted to return to. Her mother noticed. "What are you always reading?" Gloria asked her one evening, watching Vivian at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, textbook open but ignored, a library book flat in front of her. "A biography," Vivian said. "About a man who bought a company nobody thought was worth buying. And then it became worth $400 million. Gloria sat down across from her. "And why does that interest you?" Vivian looked up. Even at 14, her eyes had that quality, that steady, measuring look that would later make executives in boardrooms shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Because," she said, "he didn't look like the kind of person they expected to buy it." She got a scholarship to Spelman College. Then a second scholarship to Wharton for her MBA. She worked 12-hour days at a consulting firm for 4 years, learning everything about corporate restructuring and acquisition strategy. Then she started her own investment firm, Cole Capital, with 2 partners and a floor of borrowed office space in Midtown Atlanta. That was 15 years ago. Today, Cole Capital managed a portfolio worth over $8 billion. But Vivian still wore the same kind of simple blazer. Still pulled her own carry-on. Still booked economy when she wanted to see something for herself. She had learned early that the people who underestimated her told her more about an organization than any financial report ever could. And on this particular Tuesday morning, walking toward Gate 14C, she was about to learn something very important about Horizon Airways. She noticed the first look before she even reached the gate counter. The agent, a young man, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of forced cheerfulness that comes from too much customer service training and not enough genuine warmth, glanced at her as she approached. His eyes moved from her face to her carry-on bag, then back to her face, and something shifted. It was subtle. Most people would have missed it. Vivian didn't miss things. She placed her boarding pass on the counter. He scanned it without looking at her. Economy, he said, and it wasn't really information, it was emphasis. Like he was confirming something to himself. That's right, she said pleasantly. He handed back her pass. Seat 24F. Middle seat. Boarding group 4. She thanked him and stepped to the side to wait. While she waited, she watched. She watched how he greeted the next passenger, a white businessman in a suit, laptop bag slung over one shoulder. The agent smiled. Made a small joke about the weather. Wished him a pleasant flight without being asked. She said nothing. She took out her phone and opened her email. The email she opened was not personal. It was a document forwarded from her lead attorney, Diane Chen, timestamped 6:47 a.m. The subject line read, Final Execution, Horizon Airways Acquisition, Signature Pending. Vivian scrolled through it slowly, her face completely neutral. $2.3 billion. 18 months of negotiations. 3 failed opening bids. 2 rounds of due diligence so intense that her team had barely slept for weeks. A competing offer from a European consortium that had almost, derailed everything. And now, here it was. The final document. Waiting for her signature. She had scheduled the signing for 2 p.m. in New York. She had wanted to take this flight first. She had wanted to sit in one of the seats, breathe the air, watch the crew, experience what passengers experienced before she sat in the CEO's chair and started making changes. She hadn't told anyone at Horizon she was coming. That was the point. Boarding Group 4 was called 20 minutes later. By that time, 3 more things had happened that she filed quietly away in her memory. A flight attendant near the jetway, a woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, had looked at Vivian's boarding pass and made a comment to a colleague that Vivian caught only partially. She heard economy and she heard a laugh. The colleague covered her mouth. Neither of them looked sorry. A second agent, a supervisor by the look of the badge on her lapel, had walked past Vivian's row of seats twice, slowing each time, her gaze landing on Vivian with an expression that belonged nowhere near a customer service environment. It was a look that said, "You don't belong here." Not in an explicit way. In the way that certain people had perfected over generations, the micro-dismissal, the flicker of disdain that could always be denied. And then, the moment that crystallized everything, a man boarding ahead of Vivian had accidentally bumped her carry-on bag, almost knocking it over. He had apologized immediately. But before Vivian could respond, the supervisor nearby had looked not at the man, but at Vivian, and said, loud enough for the people around them to hear, "We ask that passengers keep their belongings secured to avoid blocking the aisle." As if Vivian had caused it. As if the inconvenience had originated with her. Vivian looked at the supervisor's badge. Patricia Hale. Ground Operations Supervisor. Horizon Airways. She adjusted her bag, smiled politely, and said, "Of course. Thank you." And she walked down the jetway. What Patricia Hale could not have known, what none of them could have known, was that by 2:01 p.m. that same day, every single name badge in that terminal would belong to a company owned by the woman they had just humiliated. But the story wasn't over. Not even close, the seat was exactly as uncomfortable as she'd expected. Seat 24F. Middle seat. The man on her left had already claimed both armrests without apparent awareness that armrests existed for sharing. The woman on her right had a toddler on her lap who was at that precise age where everything was fascinating and nothing was containable. Vivian was not bothered by any of this. She had grown up sharing a bedroom with two siblings in a 900-square-foot apartment. Physical discomfort had never broken her concentration. What she noticed, instead, was the service. The flight attendant who worked her section was the same dark-haired woman from the jetway. Her name tag said Cassandra. Cassandra moved through the cabin with a particular rhythm, warm and attentive near the front of economy, noticeably quicker and more distracted as she worked toward the back. When she reached Vivian's row, she was already moving past. "Excuse me," Vivian said quietly. Cassandra paused. Not with a smile. With the expression of someone interrupted. "Could I have a glass of water?" "Beverage service will begin after we reach cruising altitude," Cassandra said. Her tone was not rude, exactly. It was the particular brand of dismissiveness that comes from deciding a passenger is not worth full effort before they've said two words. "Of course," Vivian said. "Thank you." 20 minutes later, beverage service began. Cassandra moved down the aisle with a cart. She asked the man on Vivian's left what he wanted. She asked the woman on Vivian's right. She did not ask Vivian. She moved the cart forward. "Excuse me," Vivian said again, her voice still gentle. "May I have that water?" Cassandra turned back with an expression of exaggerated patience. The man across the aisle, a heavy-set man in a falcon's cap, had been watching. He saw it too. "Sure," Cassandra said, in a voice that meant anything but. She set a plastic cup of water on Vivian's tray table without eye contact and moved on. The man in the falcon's cap caught Vivian's eye. He shook his head slowly. A small solidarity, the kind that passes between strangers who have both recognized the same thing. Vivian gave him a small nod. Then she picked up her water, took a sip, and went back to her phone. She was reviewing the organizational chart for Horizon Airways' executive structure. Cassandra's name would not appear on that chart. But Vivian made a note, in the small leather notebook she kept in the front pocket of her bag, in her neat, precise handwriting. In-flight service culture, significant intervention required. Starts from training, but reflects management priorities. This is not a Cassandra problem. This is a leadership problem. She turned the page and kept writing. By the time the plane landed at LaGuardia, she had 5 pages of notes. She had also been the subject of one more incident she hadn't anticipated. About an hour into the flight, the pilot had come on the intercom to announce some mild turbulence ahead and advise passengers to fasten their seatbelts. The cabin had settled into that slightly tense quiet that precedes turbulence, everyone aware of their own mortality in a way that air travel uniquely produces. Cassandra had moved through the aisle doing seatbelt checks. She had leaned across passengers. She had been thorough. She had skipped Vivian's row entirely. The woman with the toddler noticed. She looked at Vivian with an apologetic expression. Vivian smiled back, a real smile, not a performed one. "It's okay," she said softly. "I've got it." She clicked her seatbelt. She looked out the small oval window at the clouds below, gray and soft and indifferent. 18 months of work, she thought. And this is what the passengers experience. She hadn't been angry. That surprised people, later, when the story came out. They expected rage. They expected a storm. What Vivian felt, at 30,000 feet, was something closer to certainty. She already knew exactly what she was going to do. The car was waiting for her at LaGuardia. Her assistant Marcus was in the back seat, tablet open, looking like a man who had been holding his breath for 6 hours. "How was the flight?" he asked, as she slid in beside him. "Informative," she said. He looked at her. He knew that word. "How bad?" She handed him the leather notebook. He flipped it open and started reading. His expression changed as he went through the pages. "Vivian. We can talk about it later, she said. Right now, I need to get to the signing. The offices of Meridian Legal Group occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Diane Chen met them in the lobby, looking polished and composed in the way of someone who had been in high-stakes legal work long enough that composure was simply her resting state. Everything is ready, Diane said. The Horizon board representatives are already upstairs. Vivian nodded. And the counteroffer from the European consortium? Expired at midnight. It's done. They rode the elevator in silence. The conference room on the 34th floor had a view of Central Park, green and precise from this height. Around the long mahogany table sat 6 people, 4 representatives from Horizon Airways board, 2 attorneys. Vivian walked in. She watched the faces. There was a flicker, a brief, involuntary recalibration, as they registered her. She was used to it. A black woman in a simple blazer, pulling a carry-on, sitting down at the head of a table to acquire a $2 billion airline company. The math didn't fit the picture they carried in their heads. She had spent her entire career in rooms where the math didn't fit. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. The lead board representative, a man named Gerald Forsyth, silver-haired and carefully dressed, leaned forward with a professional smile. Ms. Cole. On behalf of Horizon Airways board, we're pleased to finalize this acquisition. Thank you, Gerald, she said. I'm pleased as well. The documents were passed. Signatures were given. The entire formal process took 43 minutes. When the final page was signed and the room had begun to stir with the particular energy of conclusion, Gerald Forsyth leaned back in his chair and said, I have to admit, Ms. Cole, when this process began 18 months ago, few of us thought it would reach this point. I know, she said simply. What made you so certain it would? She considered the question. I took a flight this morning, she said. On Horizon. Gerald blinked. I'm sorry. Economy class, she said. Atlanta to LaGuardia. Flight 112. She paused. I wanted to understand what we're working with. The room had gone very quiet. And? Gerald said carefully. And, Vivian said, now I understand. She closed her copy of the documents and stood. I'll be in touch with the executive team by end of week, she said. I have some changes I'd like to discuss. She picked up her carry-on bag, the same one she'd pulled through the terminal that morning, and walked out of the conference room. She was, as of 43 minutes ago, the owner of Horizon Airways. And she was already thinking about what came next. But the story wasn't done yet. Because that night, something happened that changed everything. Vivian had been planning. It was 9:47 p.m. when her phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She was in her hotel room, sitting by the window with a room service dinner she had barely touched, the leather notebook open beside her laptop. The city glittered below, indifferent and beautiful. She picked up the phone. The message read, My name is Jerome Hale. My mother works at Horizon Airways. Her name is Patricia. I think you might remember her from this morning. I need to talk to you. Please. Vivian sat very still. She read the message twice. Patricia Hale. Ground Operations Supervisor. The woman who had watched her in the terminal with that look, the micro-dismissal, the public correction that hadn't been warranted. That Patricia. She typed back, How did you get this number? The response came quickly, You're not as invisible as you think. I've been following Cole Capital for 2 years. I knew it was you at the gate this morning the moment I saw you. A pause. Then, I wasn't there to do anything. I was picking up my mother after her shift. I watched what happened. I'm sorry. And I need you to know something about my mother that she will never tell you herself. Vivian stood up. She walked to the window and looked at the city below for a long moment. Then she typed, "Tell me." What he told her took nearly an hour, back and forth in messages, then finally a phone call that lasted until past midnight. And it didn't just change her plans for Horizon Airways. It changed her understanding of why she had wanted to buy it in the first place. Patricia Hale had worked at Horizon Airways for 22 years. She had started as a gate agent. She had trained for every ground operations role the company offered. She had applied for a management promotion 4 times. 4 times, she had been passed over, always with a different reason, always with the same result. She had finally gotten the supervisor position 2 years ago, not because the culture had changed, but because the previous supervisor had quit and there was no one else available with her level of experience. She was, by every operational metric, exceptional at her job. Her section of the terminal ran tighter than any other. Her team's boarding efficiency was consistently in the top 5% system-wide. Passenger complaints in her section were the lowest in the building. And she was miserable. "She's been fighting that place for 20 years, Jerome said, his voice controlled but barely. "She's been fighting just to stay there. Every evaluation cycle. Every time a new terminal director comes in and looks at her like she needs to prove herself all over again. She doesn't smile enough. She's too direct. She's intimidating." He was quiet for a moment. "She became hard," he said. "I'm not defending what she did to you this morning. I'm not. But I want you to understand what made her that way. She stopped seeing passengers the way she used to. She stopped seeing people the way she used to. Because that place spent 20 years teaching her that grace doesn't get rewarded. Toughness is the only thing that keeps you in the room." Vivian had been listening without interrupting. She thought about the look Patricia had given her. The look she had interpreted as disdain. She thought about it differently now. It hadn't been the look of someone who thought Vivian was beneath her. It had been the look of someone who had been told, in 100 subtle ways over 20 years, that people who looked like them didn't belong in certain spaces. And that look had been turned outward, weaponized by a system, passed forward in a chain of damage that Patricia herself might not have been able to see. It was not an excuse. But it was a truth. "Why are you telling me this?" Vivian asked. "Because you own the airline now," Jerome said simply. "And I need you to know that my mother is not the problem. She's what the problem created. And if you fire her, you won't fix anything." Vivian looked at the city lights below her window for a long time. "I'm not going to fire her," she said finally. Jerome exhaled. "But," Vivian continued, "I am going to talk to her. Directly. And I need her to be willing to have that conversation." "I'll make sure of it," he said. After she hung up, Vivian sat at the desk for a long time. She opened the leather notebook to a fresh page. She began to write. Not notes about operational changes or executive restructuring. She wrote about her father, Raymond, who had driven delivery trucks for 30 years and never once been offered a route into management, though he had trained half the people who were. She wrote about her mother, Gloria, who had cleaned offices where the people whose desks she polished would never have thought to learn her name. She wrote about herself at 14, reading about a man who bought a company nobody thought he could buy. She wrote, "This is not just a business acquisition." It never was. 3 days later, Vivian was back in Atlanta. The meeting was arranged by Jerome at a coffee shop near the airport, neutral ground, no cameras, no witnesses except the morning regulars who paid them no attention. Patricia Hale arrived 3 minutes early. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and she looked both smaller and more tired than she had in her supervisor's uniform. She saw Vivian and stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Patricia sat down across from her. "Jerome said you wanted to meet," Patricia said. Her voice was steady, but barely. "I did," Vivian said. A silence. The coffee shop hummed around them. "I owe you an apology," Patricia said. The words were clearly difficult, not because she didn't mean them, but because sincerity had been a luxury she'd been running low on for a long time. "What I did at the gate was wrong. I don't have an excuse." "I know," Vivian said. "And I appreciate that." Another silence. "Your son told me about your 22 years at Horizon," Vivian said. Patricia's jaw tightened. "He shouldn't have." "I'm glad he did." Vivian leaned forward slightly. "Patricia. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I think you understand that airline better than almost anyone in it. And I need people who understand it." Patricia stared at her. "I was passed over 4 times, she said quietly. 4 times. I know. Do you know why, the last time? The actual reason they gave?" Patricia's eyes had sharpened. Whatever she had expected from this meeting, it wasn't this. "They told me I had a presence problem. That I could be difficult to approach. I'd spent 20 years making that terminal run and they told me I had a presence problem." She stopped herself. Took a breath. "I'm not looking for sympathy," she said. "I'm not offering sympathy," Vivian replied. "I'm offering a different kind of conversation." She paused. "I'm putting together a culture reform team for Horizon. An internal group that will audit hiring practices, promotion pipelines, training protocols, and service standards, from the inside. People who know how the system actually works. Who've lived inside it." Patricia was completely still. "I'd like you to be part of that team," Vivian said. The silence stretched out. "You're serious," Patricia finally said. "I don't drive to a coffee shop before 8 in the morning for conversations I'm not serious about," Vivian said. Something moved across Patricia's face. Something that might have been the beginning of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Why?" she asked. "After what I did." "Because," Vivian said, "the people who know exactly how a broken system works are the most important people in fixing it." She met Patricia's eyes. "And because someone should have done this for you 20 years ago. That doesn't mean I'm doing it as charity. I'm doing it because it's the right move and you're the right person." Patricia looked down at her coffee cup. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. She blinked it back with the practiced control of someone who had learned never to show softness in professional spaces. "I don't even know what to say," she said. "You don't have to say anything yet," Vivian said. "Think about it. Talk to Jerome. And if you decide yes, you let me know." She stood, picked up her bag. "For what it's worth," Vivian said, pausing, "I've been underestimated in every room I've ever walked into. I know what that does to a person over time." She looked at Patricia steadily. "It either breaks you, or it builds something very hard and very useful. I think yours built something useful. I'd like to find out." She left a business card on the table. She walked out of the coffee shop into the warm Atlanta morning. Her phone rang before she reached her car. It was Marcus. "The press found out about the acquisition," he said. "It's already breaking on Bloomberg." "Good," she said. "Vivian, it's everywhere. They're calling it the largest acquisition of a U.S. carrier by an independent investor in a decade. The photos of you from the terminal are already circulating, someone got footage." She stopped walking. "What footage?" She said that it was 12 seconds long. Someone had recorded it on their phone from 3 rows back, the moment when Cassandra had skipped Vivian's row during seatbelt checks, panning back to capture Vivian's face and then the surrounding passengers' reactions. The man in the Falcon's cap was visible, shaking his head. The caption on the upload read, "Flight attendant literally ignored the black woman in 24F for 4 hours. Also she's the one who just bought the airline LOL." By the time Vivian sat down at her desk that afternoon, the video had been watched 11 million times. The comments were everything: fury, disbelief, dark humor, debates about race and class and what the purchase of an airline by a black woman meant in the larger story of American business. Cable news had already booked 3 different pundits to argue about it. Cassandra's name had not been released publicly. Neither had Patricia's. Vivian had made that decision herself, quietly, before anyone asked. "We're not doing this as a public shaming," she told Marcus. "We're doing this as a reform. The internet is going to shame them regardless," he said. "That's not my department," she said. "My department is what happens inside the company." By Friday of that week, she had her first meeting with the full Horizon Airways executive team, new team, under her ownership. She walked into a room of carefully assembled faces and set her leather notebook on the table. She told them what she had seen on Flight 112. She told them what her 5 pages of notes contained. She told them what she intended to do. "This is not a cosmetic change," she said, standing at the head of the table. "This is not a PR initiative. We are rebuilding the culture of this airline from the intake process to the executive floor, and every single person in this room is going to be part of that work or they are going to find somewhere else to be." She looked around the table. "Do we understand each other?" Nobody spoke. "Good," she said. "Let's begin." The changes did not happen overnight. Real change never does. Anyone who has ever tried to shift the culture of a large institution knows that it moves like a ship. You turn the wheel, and for what feels like forever, nothing seems to happen, and then slowly, the bow begins to swing. Over the following 8 months, Vivian's culture reform team, which Patricia Hale led with a fierceness and a thoroughness that surprised no one who knew her history, overhauled the training protocols for every front-facing role at Horizon. They rewrote the promotion pipeline criteria to remove the subjective language, presence, approachability, cultural fit, that had been used for decades as quiet gatekeeping mechanisms. They instituted peer review processes for supervisor evaluations. They launched a passenger experience audit program where executives flew in economy, incognito, 4 times a year. Cassandra, for her part, was not fired. She was required to complete a comprehensive retraining program and placed under a mentorship arrangement with a senior flight attendant who had been with the company for 30 years. 3 months into the process, she requested a private meeting with HR and submitted a written reflection on her conduct that, by all accounts, was genuine and difficult. Nobody announced this. Nobody made it a press moment. It was simply part of the work. The man in the Falcons cap, whose name turned out to be Derek Williams, a high school football coach from Marietta, was contacted by Cole Capital's communications team and offered a seat on the newly established Passenger Experience Advisory Board. He accepted. He showed up to every meeting in a different Falcons hat. He became, over time, one of the most valuable voices in the room. And Patricia Hale, 22 years after being hired as a gate agent, received a promotion that no subjective language could block. Director of Culture and Standards, Horizon Airways. The announcement came with a formal letter from the CEO, from Vivian, that read, in part, "You spent 2 decades learning exactly where this company's failures were hidden. Now it's time to fix them." Vivian gave one interview about the acquisition. She sat across from a journalist named Claire Okafor at a small office in Atlanta, no cameras, just a voice recorder and 2 cups of tea. Claire asked all the expected questions. The business strategy. The negotiation. The viral video. Vivian answered carefully and without drama. Then Claire asked, "Was there a personal reason you chose Horizon? Of all the acquisition targets you could have pursued?" The room was quiet for a moment. Vivian looked at her hands. At the thin gold watch on her wrist. "My father," she said, "flew Horizon Airways once. It was the only time he ever flew anywhere. He saved for 2 years to take my mother to see her sister in New York. It was their 25th anniversary." She was quiet. "He was treated badly on that flight," she said. "Not dramatically badly. Nothing you could have pointed to and called an incident. But he felt it. He felt invisible. He felt like the space wasn't meant for him. She looked up. He never flew again. He told himself it was because planes made him nervous. But I knew the real reason. She turned the watch on her wrist. He passed away 4 years ago, she said. He never saw what I was building. He never knew about the Horizon deal. She stopped. Started again. I bought this airline because I wanted to build something that his version of himself, that careful, proud, hard-working man who saved for 2 years to take my mother to New York, deserved to exist inside. Claire didn't say anything for a moment. Did it help? She finally asked. Does it feel like enough? Vivian smiled. It was not a performing smile. It was the quiet, real kind. No, she said. It'll never be enough. But it's something. And something, built right, becomes more.